Global Affairs analyst Collins Nweke joins me now to discuss this. Good to have you join us on the World Now, Collins Nweke. Now, let's look at the fact that this tension between the U.S. and China has been rising for a long time now, but this has now been made worse by the coronavirus pandemic. Many have likened this to the Cold War. Do you think that this is where this is heading between China and the U.S.?
Indeed, you have captured it pretty well in your introduction when you mentioned the fact that the battle between China and the U.S. have been raging over the years and indeed heightened with the advent of Donald Trump to power. Now, if you mix it up with recent declarations by Donald Trump, when he said that China has mishandled the coronavirus crisis and that his administration needs to punish China for that. So you begin to now wonder where this current battle is actually emanating from. Is it a mixture of circumstances, or is it indeed part of the strategy of Donald Trump and the United States government to curtail the global economic dominance of China? Well, ultimately, what we are seeing is that the Cold War, the trade war, continues, and it is now taking a different turn. If you see that Donald Trump actually is using tactics that he's never been known to use before, which is indeed going through multilateralism. He's making steps to use or to work collaboratively with other countries, which we know that in the past he's not used to doing. So using that strategy means that he's trying something different, and that means that he's taking this more seriously than we know him to do in the past.
All right, so in the U.S., critics allege that Beijing wasn't upfront about the dangers of this virus. Do you think that at any point that China was forthright?
That is very hard to say. What we are seeing indeed is mixed information coming from China. Now, whether these are deliberate or whether this came as a consequence of, being confronted with something that is novel to them, something that they were, struggling to, wrap their heads around, is a different, issue altogether. We also see that in other parts of the world, including the United States of America, Europe not excluded, they all had moments where they actually struggled to understand what this virus is all about and how to handle it. Now, that said, there are some very obvious signs that, China wasn't quite forthcoming with information. The world didn't know exactly what they were doing, and very recently, they had to, declare a new set of figures other than the one that they had declared initially. So yes, I think more needs to be done to find out exactly whether these sets of, wrong signals were as a consequence of trying to understand what was happening, or whether they are deliberate.
The world is now looking to China for some level of economic recovery in terms of economic activities. Now, how will this tension between the U.S. and China impact on global economic recovery during this pandemic?
If not checked, the tension between the two powerful nations, is actually will actually spell trouble for the recovery efforts. And that is why a number of people who actually suspect or maybe even have very strong feelings that China had behaved badly in this whole episode are saying that yes, there are questions to be asked, but those questions have to be asked at the right time. So those people indeed point at the timing of the steps that Trump is taking now to say that, it is not right. They should concentrate first on building a global coalition, especially to find the cure, but also the vaccine for the coronavirus, and very importantly, forming a global alliance to be able to rejig the global economy. So indeed, if the trade war now going on between China and the US is not put to check, it will spell trouble for a quicker recovery of the global economy.
Now, just beyond even the weaker recovery of the economy, if we are to be honest, we know that for some years now, the engine of growth for the oil market has been China. So what does this mean for the demand and price of crude oil?
What it means is that with the instability heightening as a consequence of, the tariff war, because that's essentially what it boils down to, between the US and China, the uncertainty will grow. And what that means is that it will affect the global economy adversely. If you consider that oil is a very essential part of that global economy, even though quite a number of countries are, kind of departing from oil, the dependency on oil. But that notwithstanding, a country like Nigeria will be, adversely affected, and other oil-producing countries of the world.
You talked about Nigeria and other oil-producing countries of the world. We saw that OPEC Plus meeting that had Russia, China, and other OPEC countries for 3 to 4 days deliberating on oil production cuts. Now, they have agreed to cut down production of oil because of storage issues, and the U.S. backed that deal. How will this impact on that? They're cutting, down on production to save the economy. So how will this impact on that?
Well, how it will impact on that is that this is part of the strategy that Donald Trump is deploying in this current battle with China, in his efforts to punish them, which he was not very well known for doing in the past, namely using multilateral approach, that is building a positive coalition of nations indirectly, so that the former allies or enemies of China are being brought into this deliberate coalition by Donald Trump, so that this way he will be able to alienate them. But I can tell you one thing: it doesn't look very likely that this is a strategy that is going to work successfully in Donald Trump's favor, because we know that he has been, insulting and, annoying, traditional American allies, that they may well think that considering the position of China in the world and the fact that Donald Trump hasn't been quite respectful, this might be the time for them to pay him back in his own coins. But anyway, it is wait and see.
So President Trump is not the only person who has complained about how China handled this outbreak. Some other countries have made comments on this. So do you think that China should be held accountable on the world stage?
Well, at some point, yes. What Donald Trump has done differently from other countries that have also raised the question is that they have, kind of put China on notice with the statement that, yes, there are things about the way you went about all of this that needs to be investigated and looked into, but they are looking for the right time to do that. The concentration, the focus at this moment, that is the actual priority, is combating the coronavirus, looking for doing research, supporting research, to find a vaccine, and then ultimately a treatment. That is where the majority of these countries are at this moment. Donald Trump happens to be the only one that is, pushing too hard to have China, punished as quickly as possible. And that's perhaps not a very smart strategy.
Global Affairs Analyst Collins Nweke, thanks for sharing your perspective with us.